We are here with Sue Mackey, and this is our final breakout session for the day. We are happy to have her from Out of the Box End of Life Living. Sue's passion lies in helping people navigate the complexities of end of life preparations as a final gift to the ones they leave behind. Her expertise in healthcare, advanced planning, and funeral planning help people communicate their options thoughtfully and deliberately to those they love. She is a certified thanatologist, a member of the ethics consult team at Boulder Community Health, a certified end-of-life doula, and president of the Funeral Consumer Society of Colorado board. I just want to say a couple of things. It's open Q&A throughout the session, and there are polls. So if you could take the polls, that would be phenomenal. And I will turn it over to Sue.
Okay. Thank you for the nice intro, Karen. Nice to be with all of you. It sounds like you've been having a pretty rich bunch of sessions here, so I'm happy to be part of all of it. We have limited time together today, but I will hope to make your time spent worthwhile. I'll move through my material in about 30 minutes-ish, and then that'll leave plenty of time afterwards for questions and answers that whatever comes up. I think we'll hold those questions and answers to the end. Feel free to put them into the question and answer area there, and then Karen will monitor all of that, and mostly we'll save them for the end, but if there's something pertinent, she'll jump in and let me know. So what do I mean by a personal statement? My wishes for my end-of-life care. I'd assume that most of you have paid attention already to getting your basic advance directives in order. For most of you, this includes going to an attorney and doing your estate planning. And then when the attorney does your estate planning, generally he or she will include your medical advance directives or living will, depending on what terminology they use, in that process. And most people feel like once they've done that, they're done. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but there's much more that in order to have a really complete plan and to make life as easy as possible for you, the people who might have to manage your affairs for you, there is more to be done. Today, we're specifically going to talk about your advanced directives, your medical advanced directives, and how to get your wishes met and honored. So we want to be able to leverage your chance of having those wishes honored. Attorneys tend to use a boilerplate type form, and some of them create really lengthy, involved 8, 9, 12-page documents with all covering all kinds of issues like dementia and what kind of powers the power of attorney has, et cetera, et cetera. I can tell you from practical experience that what works in the hospital is simple. They don't have the time to read through 9 to 12 pages of legalese. They want to know who the power of attorney is. That's the number one thing they want to know. So the medical durable power of attorney form is the most important form that you will fill out. And then they'll look also, if you do end up in a life-threatening situation, they will look at your living will as to what your wishes might be around life support. Unfortunately, with these lengthy, involved devices, it's unwieldy. So what I like to recommend to people is that they have a medical power of attorney, a simple one, 1 or 2 pages. Colorado has an advanced medical power of attorney form available online. You can fill it out yourself. You don't need an attorney. And that something simple like that is the easiest for the hospital to deal with. It's less scanning, if nothing else. And then the rest of it, I look at as support for your caregivers and for your healthcare providers. So the only thing that's legal in all of your advanced care planning is that medical power of attorney form. And the rest of it is up for interpretation. And so I like to keep it out of the healthcare system and out of mainstream and just have something written down that will help your caregivers and your decision makers to make your decisions for you based on what you've had to say. And of course, we want whatever you've written down to reflect conversations that you've already had with your folks. Conversation is really the most important, so that they know from your mouth, like verbally, what it is that you would prefer in certain circumstances, what's important to you, how you define quality of life. But then you'd ideally like to have those things, those thoughts and feelings and wishes reflected in writing, so that if the child who lives 2,000 miles away shows up and you haven't had the conversation with them, they aren't just taking the word of the one person that you have had the conversation with. Interestingly, families, when families are at the bedside of someone who's dying and they have to make decisions and they're looking for guidance, if they're looking at an attorney drafted form, oftentimes they look at it questioningly. Is this really what my mother or father chose, or is it just what the attorney wrote up and they just signed the document? Like we do with documents, often we don't take the time to read word for word and really reflect on them. So we sign off on it and we think our job is done and we've been taken care of. What they found is that families who are presented with a personal statement of some sort, something handwritten, something written on the computer and signed, that's in the person's own words, if they follow those directions, first of all, they take those directions much more seriously. But if the person dies and the family knows that they have followed that person's instructions, regardless of what decisions were made and how smoothly things went medically and what the outcome was, families do much better in their grieving process if they just know that they followed your wishes. The only way they can know if they followed your wishes is if you shared your wishes with them, so they know that they followed them. So you catch my drift. It's just there's not the beating themselves up around of guilt around, should we have done this a different way? Did we make the right decision? I wanted to do it this way, but you wanted to do it that way. There isn't as much of that, because it's hopefully fairly clear what it is that you would have appreciated. So how do you know where to start as far as writing out your personal directives, your personal statement? Karen has uploaded the document that I'm going to share with you today, so that all of you will have access to it. And it's a Word document. It is meant as a template. So it's not necessarily meant for you to take it verbatim. It's pretty much my interpretation of the world, and it reflects what my wishes are and what many of the people I work with, how they feel. But that being said, it's meant for you just to, as a jogger, for you to see what the issues are to address. And then as we go through this in the next 20 minutes or so, I'd like you to sit with each paragraph, each subject matter, and the wording, and see how it lands on you. And if it feels right to you, feel free to use my wording. But if it lands on you wrong, or is completely the opposite of how you feel, or you have a much better way of putting it, you really do want it in your words. So that's why it's in a Word document. It's super easy to cut and paste, delete, replace, etc. So I'm going to do my best here to share my PowerPoint. Oh, there we go. And this is the title of the document that you'll be looking for. I'm not sure what your system is for the upload of the documents, but you'll find it. And I'm just going to go through this. So bear with me. And Karen, if you'll jump in if there are questions where I need to stop, please do, because I can't see the chat.
Absolutely.
The first section is meant to be support for your caregivers and healthcare providers. You're asking it's a big responsibility. It's a big ask to have someone step in and make these kinds of decisions for you. It can be time consuming. It can be emotional. It can be a one hospitalization type situation, or it could be a 10-year dementia diagnosis situation. We don't know. So So I like to start off with just acknowledging that, this is tough. So I, Sue Mackey, write this personal statement as my gift to you. I will do my best here to share with you how I feel about my potential treatment at the end of life, what my values are, what my comfort and spiritual needs are, and what my goals of care are, so that you aren't making decisions for me without guidance. My purpose in writing this is to reduce the burdens of guilt or conflicts that might often arise amongst family members when tough medical decisions need to be made for someone else, and to clarify my intentions with my healthcare providers. Use this document as my support for your decision process and share it with my health providers if needed to advocate for me. To my medical power of attorney, in making treatment decisions for me, my wish is for you to be as proactive as possible, exploring all options, including the option of doing nothing, and not just going along with what the medical team determines on first pass. Despite good intentions, often the goal of healthcare is to physically keep a body alive without full consideration for quality of life post-treatment.
Hi, Susan. What slide are you on? I'm sharing from my screen because we don't see the PowerPoint on your end.
Oh, you don't. I'm on support for my caregivers and healthcare providers. It's the second one.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. So you're not seeing my screen, huh? Okay.
We are not.
Let me go back and just make sure I didn't. I'm sorry, everyone. Let me get to. All right. Are you seeing my screen now?
They might just be seeing mine. Let's see.
Thank you for stopping me.
That's okay.
Yeah, I'm seeing your screen, I think, and not.
Okay. Okay. Okay, hold on. So we're on the second one. Let's see. Let's go back. Okay, so we are on. Are we on the one where it shows? Is that what we're on?
Nope, the one before that.
One before that? Okay, perfect.
Okay, well, maybe I'll just cue you.
You just tell me when to go to the next screen, like give me a thumbs up and we're good to go.
Okay.
Okay, great.
So I invite you to be inquiring, always asking what the benefits of a proposed treatment are versus the burdens. Even if you're feeling a lot of pressure, please try to take your time making decisions and trust your heart. Consider the opinions and needs of others in the family, but feel confident in your knowing of me to make decisions that I would have made for myself. Just as an aside, often, medical power of attorney often does not act alone. If there's other members of the family who have an opinion, they tend to consider those opinions. They have the ultimate say, if for no other reason except that the healthcare providers really just want one point person to have to deal with. They don't want to deal with multiple family members stepping in and offering an opinion or having to explain to different people, etc. Okay, back to the document. I am aware of how complex medical decisions can be, so I trust that you will make the best decisions for me based upon what you know at the time, knowing that it isn't easy or straightforward and that there are often not right answers. Also know that after having learned the risks and benefits of certain medical options, the right decision may be to do nothing and let nature take its course. So I ask that you, after consultation with my healthcare providers, use your best judgment to distinguish between treatments that are humane and palliative, which means for the purpose of comfort, and those that only postpone the moment of death. So you get the gist of that section. However you would like to reach out to your people and let them know that, this is a tough job, you're acknowledging and appreciating. Okay, next slide there, Karen. Can you do next slide? Thanks. Okay, so there's a section called My Feelings About My Dying and Death. In this section, it's addressing life-sustaining treatments. So I do not want my life to be prolonged, nor do I want life-sustaining treatment to be provided or continued if my agent or family believes the burdens of the treatment outweigh the expected benefits. Please take into consideration my medical prognosis, the probability and extent of my recovery, my age, my projected level of mental competence, and ability to think clearly following said treatment, my emotional condition, the medical risk, physical pain, and economic cost of further treatment, the impact on my family, and the quality and dignity of my remaining life. That's pretty good direction. This section is something that I like to be addressed in some way, because most attorneys living will forms, they have a blank. They have you fill in, I would like life-sustaining treatment to be continued for blank number of days. And people will fill in, keep me on life support for 5 days, 7 days, 21 days. As you can imagine, it's very arbitrary, and it has no relevance to the actual to an actual hospitalization. Every circumstance is so vastly different, and there are circumstances where it's very hard on a family where someone said, keep me on life support for 21 days, but the doctor says, this is day one and there is absolutely no hope. And so then the family, the medical power of attorney is stuck having to follow reasonable medical advice and disregard the actual wishes of the person. So this is my preference. Rather than stating a number of days, life-sustaining treatment on a time-limited basis is acceptable to me under the following conditions: allowing my agent or family time to make decisions for my care that they are comfortable with, to buy time for my loved ones to arrive at my bedside before my death, and or to allow for organ transplant for the benefit of another. Those are the three circumstances that, for me anyway, is reasonable for remaining on life support. Other people will say no life support, period, and that's fine too. But if you are willing to accept some period of life-sustaining treatment, it's better to address it in a circumstance sort of a way rather than a finite number of days. Despite my wishes to choose death when there's no hope for recovery, I want the best possible medical care, including life-sustaining measures, when the prognosis appears to be favorable and there's a reasonable chance that I'll be restored to an acceptable quality of life. So that's that section. Next slide, Karen. This is a short section that's actually very important, and it's just quality of life for me means blank, and you fill in the blanks. What does it mean to you personally to have quality of life? And the alternate way of wording it is, I would consider my life not worth living any longer if. So I would consider my life not living any longer worth living any longer if I can't eat ice cream and watch football. Or I would consider my life not worth living any longer if I'm no longer enjoying the company of my family and loved ones. Or I would consider my life not worth living anymore if I can no longer communicate with those around me. So very personal, but very, very important, because this is actually the most important section, because it's easier for a family to make a decision for you or for you, it works better than if you're saying ahead of time, I don't ever want to be in a respirator. There may be circumstances where a respirator would be appropriate and would bring you back to the quality of life that you would find acceptable. Next slide, Karen. So you definitely, the biggest thing on most people's minds is cognitive decline. I actually generally include a dementia directive when I'm working with people to do their medical directives, a separate directive that's just around dementia. But this is kind of a condensed version. And so this section says, if I have a severe decline in my cognitive abilities, I wish to be kept comfortable free of pain, and maintained in as dignified a state as possible. And I ask for your support to allow the release of death, particularly under these circumstances. Unbearable pain with no possibility of relief. Inability to recognize loved ones or to remember recent events. Unacceptable indignities of helplessness and loss of self-control. Delusion or radical personality change. If I require constant physical restraint and supervision because my behavior threatens my own safety or the safety of others. Your prolonged anguish, watching me deteriorate and linger to no purpose. I wish to have my personal care and dignity kept up. If this becomes a hardship for my caregivers, please take care of yourselves and hire respite. So I know this is tough stuff to face. It's not easy to think of ourselves in any of these sorts of circumstances, but being able to think it through ahead of time is a much better time than at the time of, or at a time have it decline to a point where we are unable to speak for ourselves, and people don't really know what we would consider acceptable. In the dementia directive, we talk about exit ramps and possible ways of getting out of your body if you are in a cognitive decline, knowing that it will only go one way, and what kind of medical treatment would be, or lack of medical treatment would be acceptable. I also say here I would enjoy the comfort of alternative therapies such as massage, craniosacral therapy, energy work, etc. That may or may not apply to you. If it doesn't, just delete. Okay, next slide. My thoughts about what happens when we die. And this is just a place to freeform write a narrative about what your feelings are about a possible afterlife, or you're fine with just knowing that when it's over, it's over. There's some comfort, again, there's some comfort in the family just knowing that you have some feelings about what happens after death and that you are okay with it or afraid of it, but share your true feelings about what you think happens. And there may be comfort there for the family in knowing that you feel that you're going to come back again as somebody's cat or something. Okay, next slide, Karen. What makes me feel comfortable when I'm not feeling well? So this section, again, is just a place to write out what makes me comfortable when I'm not feeling well. So we're talking about hot baths, fresh air, a dark room, a light room, being read to, visitors, no visitors, being left alone, sunlight, TV on and off, on or off. I worked with a couple that I was almost laughing out loud with them because they were polar opposites on everything. He wanted the room dark. She wanted all the windows open and the blinds pulled open. She wanted the TV on for company. He didn't want the TV on at all. One of them wanted visitors, as many people. She wanted lots of distractions, and he wanted to be left alone, nobody to come, just no visitors. So it was good for them to talk about, because you know how we project onto other people that what makes you feel good, you assume makes someone else feel good. And it's so often not the case. So being able to fill this out will help you get what you want if you're not able to speak for yourself, so that people can address keeping the room nice and sunny, or fresh flowers around you, or whatever it is that you might be asking for. And in the same section, I've included a paragraph that says, I wish to die with dignity and peace. It's important for me to know that I will not have to die a lingering or demeaning death, or endure a hopeless and severely disabling condition that would involve great and irremediable suffering for myself and or those I love. Quality of life is far more important to me than quantity of life. And again, that may not be your feelings. So one perspective. Next slide, Karen. This is a section to address hospice. I would like to be enrolled in hospice as early in my illness as possible. I prefer to die at home as long as my caregivers, family and or paid, are able to provide for my care there. if it is deemed necessary to transfer me to a care facility due to strain on my caregivers or inability to control symptoms, I accept that decision as long as I am not put into an intensive care unit. And then there's a place to write in your preferred hospice if you've had a positive experience or heard good things, or you've pre-interviewed several hospices and you know that there's one in particular that you would prefer. For those of you who aren't familiar with hospice, we can talk about that in the Q&A section. And again, this is not across the board. I've known people who did not want to die at home. They wanted to be in a care facility. They felt more secure there. So whatever your feelings are, this is a place to address that. Next slide. My feelings about treatment of pain that I might have. So I desire vigorous treatment of my physical and psychological pain and suffering. Pain, breathlessness, agitation, itching, etc., even if the treatment unintentionally causes or hastens my death. Dying sooner rather than later would be my wish. Now, this is, again, not everybody's wishes. Some people would rather not have such aggressive treatment, and they would rather stay alive as long as possible. Next paragraph is, I'm willing to tolerate some pain in order to have periods of lucidity so that I am able to be present with my loved ones. Or you might indicate, I do not wish to be in pain, even if I sleep a lot or I'm drowsy. I'd prefer to be given enough medication to keep me comfortable. So this is your place to, we all know how we are with pain, how well we tolerate it. Some people can tolerate a lot.
Hi, Sue. I'm sorry to interrupt. We can hear the paper shuffling, and it's kind of drowning you out.
Oh, that's annoying. Okay. Thank you for letting me know.
Thank you.
Okay. In this same section, I would prefer to be offered hand feeding if I'm unable to feed myself, yet still able to swallow and enjoy food. At the point at which I'm unable to swallow or enjoy food, it will be my choice to stop eating and drinking altogether. I have no fear of suffering from this choice, as I know that it's a gentle way to allow a natural death, and I request hospice support to manage any possible symptoms. I know that under no circumstances would I consider your support of my choice to not eat or drink killing me, but that you would be letting the disease or accident run its natural course. Consider watching the documentary A Dying Wish by Karen Van Buren to understand this process. I do not wish to be kept alive. Oh, next slide, I guess, Karen, I missed that. I do not want to be kept alive by tube feeding if I'm comatose, vegetative, or otherwise so mentally and or physically impaired that on a long-term basis, I cannot participate in the experiences of life that are meaningful to me. So this is a very much larger conversation, the right to stop eating and drinking and what that involves. So I'm happy to answer questions about that at the end. Next slide. So my thoughts about welcoming an exit ramp. If I'm no longer enjoying an acceptable quality of life from what you know of my definition as such, I ask that you choose to not treat any underlying disease or infection and allow me a natural death. I would view this choice as my exit ramp out of a way of living in existence that is unacceptable to me. This would include, but isn't limited to, discontinuing heart medications, not treating an infection with antibiotics, and or not treating any new diagnoses. Next slide. I don't want financial resources wasted on unnecessary procedures or diagnostic tests after my life has lost its meaning and dignity. Allowing my disease or medical condition to run its natural course is what I would want. I would also like it taken into consideration the toll that my dying process may be taking on my caregivers. I do not want to be an emotional and physical burden at the expense of my caregivers' physical and or emotional health. At the point at which that burden becomes unmanageable, moving me to a care facility or allowing me to die would be my gift to you. So there's two things that are often the elephant in the room. Financial resources, wasted financial resources, prolonging a dying process that may not be necessary. So I think it's important to address that because people often feel like, oh, it's not right to talk about money when someone's dying. But if your goal is to be able to leave a financial legacy or not be wasteful, then it should be addressed. And then the issue around being moved to a care facility or not. A lot of times people are, I've heard many stories of people telling their kids, please assure me, promise me you will not move me into a nursing home. And then the care becomes so intense that the family system is devolving and the caregivers are getting sick and there may be behaviors that are intolerable, the patient being up all night or things like that, where it really is necessary for the health and well-being of the caregivers to move the person into a nursing home. So I think that giving the family permission to do that can help relieve guilt, which I guess you get that that's one of my MOs. Next slide, Karen. Thanks. Sensitivities to medications you should know about. This is just a section to indicate if you know that every time you go under a general anesthetic, you get sick as a dog and it takes you 3 days to recover. Indicate that here. Or that you know that certain pain meds work better for you and others give you a severe headache or don't work. Indicate that also. It'll help because they have, the docs have their standard medications and such, and they don't necessarily track your past reactions. Next slide. And then spiritual support, addressing spiritual support that you might or might not want. So I do not fear death. I feel like I have lived a full and rich life. At the point at which being in my body causes too much suffering and or I'm lacking quality of life, I will welcome death as a release. May or may not be your feelings. But this goes on to I ask that you please talk to me, even if I'm non-responsive. Trust that I still hear you, tell stories and reminisce about our times together. Share with me what's going on in your lives. Too often you see patients laying in bed and they're either sleeping or comatose, and the family's visiting over their physical body, referring to them as she or he, and not including them. And most of you probably heard that hearing is the last sense to go as far as our physicality. So out of respect for the person who is still alive, even if they aren't responsive, I think it's an important issue to address. And then there's a place to indicate the type of spiritual support you might appreciate. If there's certain readings or practices or rituals that support you, great. If there are things that you would prefer not to be put upon you, indicate that. And you can also indicate certain people who would be helpful during their process, a minister or a special friend or rabbi or some such. And then the last couple sections, one more slide there. This is a recent addition, and people really appreciate this. My request for a remembrance ritual, a way in which you might remember me in memoriam. So many of you probably have some sort of a fun little thing that you might do to honor someone who's passed on their birthday or their death day or special anniversaries. On my dad's birthday, we all of us kids eat ice cream because my dad was known to sit with a gallon of ice cream on his lap and a spoon when he watched TV in the evening, a half gallon only. If you can indicate that, since walking in nature was super important to you or walking in a particular area was one of your great joys, suggest it as a remembrance ritual to those that you're leaving behind, that they could do that as a way to remember you. And a nice way to reach out and connect from the other side. And then I have a last paragraph. My agent and family shall be entitled to reasonable compensation from my personal funds for their travel expenses and any expenses incurred while caring for me. And you may or may not choose to include that, but sometimes there are hardships incurred with family having to travel from a distance, etc. So that is my suggestion or my template for issues to address in a personal statement. And now I really want to hear from you all.
Yes, please feel free to ask questions in the chat or in the Q&A. And Sue, thank you very much. That was very insightful. And we will wait for a couple questions. Please don't forget to take the polls that we have. It's right next to the chat up in the top tab. We really would like to know your thoughts. And let's give it a couple minutes and see if people have questions. There's got to be a couple questions, I would think. We do have, I'll put Sue's website in the chat box right now.
Yeah. I know that this is really heavy stuff. I know that, these are very graphic descriptions of what our end of life might look like and things that we might need to or want to consider. So it can be making people uncomfortable. I do get that.
Here's a question. Can you differentiate between palliative care and hospice and how to address that in the MPOA?
Okay, so the MPOA is just a form to assign your agent, your person who will speak for you. So you'll be addressing that in some sort of other documentation, supportive documentation. And I just lost track of the question.
Hold on, let me go back.
Palliative. I'm sorry, I got it. Palliative. Hospice care is palliative care. But so when they speak of palliative care separate from hospice, that is more upstream than hospice. The main differentiation is that hospice is palliative or comfort care when a person has a terminal diagnosis of 6 months or less and some other parameters. Just straight up palliative care further upstream is a similar coordinated care where you have a doctor, a nurse, a social worker, possibly a nurse's aide, a chaplain, that kind of team care when you're dealing with some sort of a life-limiting illness, ongoing chronic pain, that sort of thing. So I hope that clarifies.
Okay, let's see what else we have. Let's see, we missed the first few minutes, so you may have addressed this. Will a transcript? Yeah, yes. So Diane, yes, there will be. And let's see, does anyone else have any other questions? Or is there anything else that you would like to add, Sue?
That was a really good question about palliative care because that does get, that's confusing. I would recommend that anyone considering hospice, you need to have a 6-month diagnosis. So it's not an issue until that point in time. But even before that, if it seems like it's down the road at some point, it's wise to do some research ahead of time and interview them. They'll come to your house and talk to you about how they do things and how responsive they are, and you get a feel for the different organizations. Voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, there's often a lot of questions about that. People will ask, what are my ways out of my body if I don't qualify for medical aid in dying? So that's a big one. Medical aid in dying, a lot of people don't understand that it's similar, has similar parameters to hospice in that you need to have a 6-month diagnosis. A doctor needs to affirm that they would be surprised if you were still around in 6 months. So that's the only access to medical aid in dying. So someone who is not wanting to live in the circumstances under which they're living, where their quality of life is not acceptable, but they don't have that 6-month diagnosis, stopping eating and drinking is our one legal option for ending our life.
And we have a comment from Freddie. We had this discussion with my mom. Tough to start the conversation, but such a blessing when it comes time to put it into practice. This was such a blessing.
Oh, thank you, Freddie. It is a hard conversation. Nobody wants to talk about this. So, it's a matter of looking for those little segues. Having just seen a movie or read a book or an article or COVID is certainly giving us an option for starting to, for addressing these topics. And if nothing else, just it's not all one conversations. It's lots of little bits of conversations, and to relay. If I had COVID, would I want to go to the hospital? Would I want to be on a respirator? If so, for, under what circumstances? Or would I prefer to stay at home and bring in hospice and accept what's happening to me? So these are conversations that are, yes, super tough and super helpful, because when there's such a relief, a lifting of weight off your shoulders, if you can just get the words out, and then you know what the person would want, and you have the gift of being able to honor that person. If you don't know, you can't take care of them in such an honoring way. So.
Okay, I have added, I will add again, but I will put the PDF regarding her slides and the template for the end of life wishes. Thank you so much, Sue, for your presentation. Oh, wait a second. Here we go, John. John says, this is so much more useful and meaningful than a living will or Colorado from most that are recommended.
The Colorado Most form. If we've got just 2 more minutes, John, thank you for bringing up the Most form. It is something I recommend to anyone who is facing a life-limiting illness, or elderly, or having chronic in and outs of the hospital. For those of you who don't know what the Most form is, it can keep you out of the ICU if that's your choice. It is a form that you fill out with your physician or PA or advanced practice nurse. They have the forms in the office. I recommend to everyone that they make an appointment, extra time on whatever next appointment they have with their PCP, to fill out a Most form. The conversation you'll have with your doctor will be profound and helpful, and then having that form and keeping that on your refrigerator, so that if paramedics would end up at your house, at your home at some point, they look on the refrigerator that's what they do. But that Most form will address whether or not you want CPR and what extent of care you would want if you were taken to the hospital. So you have some say. And because it's a doctor's order, it's signed by your physician, it has to be honored by the paramedics. So it holds a lot of weight. What we're doing here, what we just went through, is helpful and supportive, but it's not going to be something that's looked at or honored by paramedics or in some sort of emergency situation.
And is there a specific place to find that form?
The Most form, it's online. I think I'm not even going to attempt to give you the website, but if you just do a search for MOST, it stands for Medical Orders for Sustained Treatment. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Take care. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.